All right, so get ready because today we are going to dive deep into this idea of business model innovation.
Okay.
And we're looking at a chapter from the Oxford Handbook of Innovation Management.
Right.
It's by Lorenzo Massa and Christopher L. Tucci.
Sounds good.
And, we always think about innovation as like, you know, shiny new gadgets or like cutting edge tech.
Yeah.
But this chapter is all about how companies can like completely shake things up, not by changing their product,
Right.
but by changing their business model.
Mm.
So think like Netflix or Spotify.
Yeah.
They didn't just like tweak things a little bit. They like revolutionized their entire industries.
Yeah. It's amazing how powerful that can be.
Right.
You could have the most amazing product in the world,
Uh-huh.
but if you don't have the right business model to back it up, it's going nowhere.
It's like having a Ferrari with a bicycle engine, all that
Yeah.
potential, but it's not going to win any races.
Exactly.
This chapter actually calls the business model the DNA of a business.
It really is. It's the blueprint for how everything works together.
Oh,
Who are your customers?
Mhm.
What do they value? How does the company actually make money?
right.
It's the underlying logic that drives everything.
So not just some fancy business school jargon.
No.
This is like the real deal.
Absolutely. And like DNA, it can evolve and adapt.
Okay.
And this chapter kind of digs into two main types of business model innovation:
Okay.
business model design and business model reconfiguration.
Okay. Let's break those down.
Okay.
Business model design, that sounds like something for startups.
It is, think of it like building a house from scratch.
Okay.
You have a blank canvas and a lot of freedom, but you also have to figure out everything
Yeah.
from the foundation to the roof.
Oh, that sounds exciting, but also incredibly daunting.
It can be.
Yeah.
There's a lot of experimentation and kind of what-if thinking involved.
Sure.
You're constantly testing hypotheses, trying new things and seeing what sticks.
Right.
And sometimes plan A completely flops.
That makes me think about a project that I worked on. Yeah.
Where the initial plan was a total disaster,
Mm-hmm.
but we learned so much from our mistakes
Right.
that it ended up being really invaluable later on.
Exactly. It's about embracing those failures as learning opportunities. The chapter uses Xerox as a prime example.
Okay.
You wouldn't believe it, but they actually invented the photocopy machine,
What?
but initially couldn't figure out how to sell it.
They invented it and couldn't sell it.
I know. Crazy, right?
Hey, is that even possible?
It was simply too expensive for most people to buy outright.
Okay.
So they had to come up with a completely new approach.
Right.
They pioneered the leafing model, which was revolutionary at the time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So even with a groundbreaking invention,
Yeah,
success really hinges on finding the right business model
absolutely.
to deliver that value to customers.
That's the key takeaway here.
Yeah.
Now, on the flip side, we have business model reconfiguration.
Okay.
This is where established companies revamp their existing models.
So it's less about building from scratch
Right.
and more like renovating existing house.
Okay.
You're working with what you already have,
Yeah,
but you're making significant changes
sure.
to modernize and improve it.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But I can also see how it could be tempting for companies
Mm-hmm.
to just stick with what they know,
Right.
especially if they've been successful in the past.
It's a common trap.
Yeah.
The chapter calls it the dominant logic trap.
Mm-hmm.
Past success can blind you to new possibilities.
Right.
Remember Kodak?
Uh-huh.
They actually invented digital photography,
Oh, wow.
but they were so focused on their film business
Right.
that they missed the boat entirely.
Oh, that's a tough lesson.
It is.
So how do companies avoid falling into that trap?
It takes a willingness to challenge assumptions,
Okay.
strategic flexibility,
Sure.
and a focus on finding new ways to unlock value from what they already have.
Okay.
Interface, the carpet company, is a great example.
Right.
Instead of just selling carpets, they shifted to a floor covering service.
Oh, okay.
They designed recyclable carpets and created a whole system for replacing and reusing them.
Interesting.
Good for the environment and good for their business.
That's brilliant. They turned a potential problem into a competitive advantage.
Exactly.
But here's where things get even more interesting.
Yeah.
The chapter talks about how business model innovation can actually be used to tackle sustainability challenges.
That's right. Companies are realizing that they can create value for themselves and for society
Right.
by addressing issues like climate change or social inequality.
But that can't be easy.
It's not.
Doing good for the world doesn't always translate into profits.
Absolutely. There are challenges.
Yeah.
For example, the chapter points out that sometimes the full cost of things like pollution
Right.
isn't reflected in market prices.
Yeah.
They call these market externalities. It's like a hidden cost that's not being accounted for.
Hmm.
And sometimes you need other technologies to exist
Sure.
before your innovation can take off, like electric vehicles needing widespread charging stations.
Right, right. Good point.
Yeah.
So how can business model innovation help overcome these hurdles?
One really fascinating example is a company called Better Place.
Okay.
They didn't actually make electric vehicles,
Interesting.
but they built the infrastructure to support them.
Okay.
They partnered with manufacturers, governments, utility companies, everyone else involved,
Wow.
to create a whole ecosystem for electric vehicles.
That's a bold approach.
Was-
Instead of just focusing on the product,
Yeah,
they tackled the bigger picture.
exactly. They understood that the success of electric vehicles depended on more than just the cars themselves.
Right.
Now, while Better Place ultimately didn't succeed as a business,
Okay.
it's a great example of the importance of considering the whole system when you're innovating.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes success requires collaborating and building the market itself.
That's a really good point.
But that brings up another important question.
Okay.
How do companies manage these new models, especially if they have several in play?
Yeah, it seems like that could get messy really fast.
It does.
Yeah, it does sound like a juggling act.
Yeah.
Especially for larger companies.
Right.
How do you even begin to manage all of that without dropping the ball?
Well, the chapter digs into some insightful ideas from Markides and Cheritu
Okay.
about managing multiple business models.
Okay.
They argue that it depends on how much those models clash or overlap,
Right.
and if they're targeting similar customer groups or not.
Okay.
So it's kind of like deciding
Yeah.
whether to offer a new product line
Uh-huh.
under your existing brand
Okay.
or to launch a whole new brand altogether.
Gotcha.
It just depends how related those offerings are
Right.
and who you're trying to reach.
So sometimes it's better to keep things totally separate.
Exactly.
Mm.
The chapter gives the example of Hindustan Unilever.
Okay.
They have a totally separate business model for the Indian market,
Mm.
which is distinct from the parent company's approach. And it lets them kind of tailor their strategy to that specific market
Right.
without disrupting their main business.
That's a great point. What about when integrating the models makes more sense?
Well, the chapter points to Singapore Airlines
Okay.
and their launch of Silk Air.
Yeah.
So they wanted to tap into the low-cost market,
Uh-huh.
but instead of creating a completely separate entity,
Right.
they integrated Silk Air into their existing operations.
So they were able to reach new customers without diluting their main brand or
Exactly.
creating unnecessary complexity.
Right. And there are also these hybrid approaches
Okay.
where companies might start with integrated models,
Uh-huh.
but then prepare for a future divorce
Okay.
or begin separately and eventually marry those models down the line.
Hmm.
So the key is to be strategic about how you manage those different models.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It takes flexibility,
Sure.
clear decision-making,
Yeah.
and sometimes a little bit of creative juggling.
Speaking of knowing when to be flexible, the chapter also talks about the challenge of knowing when you need a new business model in the first place.
Yeah, sometimes you need to innovate just to survive.
Right.
And the chapter ties this back to the idea that markets are constantly evolving,
Mm-hmm.
and what customers value most changes over time.
Yeah.
So you think about how companies might first compete on cool features,
Right.
then it shifts to reliability, then convenience, then customization, and eventually, often it comes down to cost.
Right.
So as the market matures,
Yeah.
business model innovation becomes crucial
Okay.
for staying ahead of the curve.
So you might start with a killer product,
Yeah.
but if your business model can't adapt to those changing needs, you're in trouble.
Exactly. And it's not just about existing customers either.
Right.
Think about trying to serve entirely new customer segments,
Okay.
like the bottom of the pyramid.
Right.
Those with very limited purchasing power.
Yeah.
Traditional business models often don't apply.
I see your point.
Right.
You need to figure out how to create value for those customers in a way that works for them and the business.
Exactly.
And then there are those massive industry shifts,
Yes.
like what we're seeing now with the rise of sustainable transportation.
Right. Those tectonic shifts demand some serious business model innovation.
It's like the ground is shifting beneath you,
Yeah,
and you need to figure out how to stay upright.
exactly.
So we've explored what business models are, how to innovate them,
Uh-huh.
and even how to manage the complexity of multiple models.
Right,
But what does this all mean for our listeners?
right.
How can they actually apply these concepts in their own lives?
Well, first and foremost, start thinking about the business model behind everything.
Okay.
Like, have X-ray vision for any business.
Hmm.
Ask yourself, who is creating value for whom?
Right.
How are they delivering that value?
Huh?
And how are they getting paid for it?
Those are the million-dollar questions, right?
They are. And by asking those questions, you'll start seeing things differently.
Yep.
You'll spot opportunities for innovation, identify potential problems early on,
Yeah.
and just make better decisions overall.
Yeah, it's like suddenly you're speaking the language of business.
Yeah,
And you can understand like the underlying mechanics of how things work.
exactly. And remember, business model innovation isn't just for CEOs and big corporations.
Right.
It's a mindset that can benefit anyone no matter what you do.
Okay.
So whether you're launching a new project, revamping an old one, or just trying to solve a problem at work, understanding business models can give you a serious edge.
So it's not just about making money.
No,
It's about like creating value and making things work better.
absolutely. And another key takeaway is to not be afraid to experiment.
Okay.
Don't let the fear of failure hold you back.
Yeah.
Some of the most successful business models out there came from challenging assumptions and trying something totally new.
Yeah. I love that. Don't just think outside the box.
Right.
Sometimes you need to throw the box away completely.
That's the spirit. And one last thing to keep in mind, business model innovation isn't a one-time thing.
Right.
It's an ongoing process.
Yeah.
The world's constantly changing.
Right.
So you have to be adaptable and willing to evolve your approach as needed.
What got you here won't get you there.
Exactly.
So you need to keep innovating to stay ahead of the curve.
Well said. And this deep dive has given us a ton of great insights to help us do just that.
Yeah.
We've gone from the basic definition of business models to real-world examples of how companies are using them to disrupt industries and even tackle global challenges.
We even touched on how to manage like the complexities of having multiple business models. And how to stay flexible in a world that's constantly in flux.
It's been quite a journey.
It has.
But here's a final thought for our listeners to ponder.
Okay.
We've talked a lot about companies and industries.
Right.
But what if we applied this same thinking to something even bigger,
Okay.
like solving global challenges?
Wow.
Imagine using the power of business model innovation to tackle poverty, climate change, or access to healthcare.
Now that's a really powerful idea.
It is.
It would take some serious creativity collaboration
Uh-huh.
and a willingness to push the boundaries of what we traditionally think of as business.
It would. But who knows? Maybe one of our listeners will be the one to crack the code and create a world-changing business model that benefits everyone.
So to all our listeners out there, we say, keep learning, keep experimenting, and never stop asking those big questions.
Right.
Because the future of business and maybe even the world depends on it. Until next time, happy innovating.